Okay, welcome to our presentation. My name is Rich Lenkov. I'm an attorney with Bryce, Downey & Lenkov. We are a Chicago-based firm. We also handle in Indiana claims. I've been in practice handling workers' compensation, general liability, and entertainment law for about 20 years. Proud member of the Illinois Manufacturing Association. Thank them very much for the opportunity to talk to you today about workers' compensation under Trump. Very timely discussion. We're taping this on the very eve of the inauguration of Donald Trump as our president. So we wanted to cover today how workers' compensation, both locally and nationally, might be affected under the new administration. Please take a moment and look at our disclaimer. This is not meant, of course, to dispense any legal advice. My contact info is in front of you. Again, my firm name is Bryce, Downey & Lenkov. You could feel free to reach out to me with any questions about today or any other issue regarding workers' compensation that you have. I do a legal-themed podcast on WGN called Legal Face Off. You can download us on iTunes. Check us out on legalfaceoff.com. We cover a wide variety of issues, including workers' compensation. So again, how will workers' compensation look differently under President Trump? Well, the first thing is, obviously, he has made Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and the repeal and replacement of that a central piece of his campaign and his administration. We've heard lots of discussion, especially over the last week or so, about his promise to replace the Affordable Care Act. How will that affect workers' compensation? In my opinion, one issue will be that there will suddenly be 20 million plus employees who no longer have health care. So we can expect to see those people seeking medical benefits from another source. They're no longer going to have care through their employer. So what's another possible source of care? Workers' compensation benefits. We all understand that in Illinois, as in many states, it is fairly easy to claim that an injury is work-related. Again, there are lots of tools that we've discussed in prior IMA webinars and through the webinars that we do through our firm, how to be aggressive and fight those kind of claims. But the reality is we will likely see some of these employees who no longer have medical coverage under the ACA. They will likely seek benefits through filing a workers' compensation claim. So you can expect to see an uptake there. Another issue that Trump has made central to his campaign is the issue with undocumented workers. He's going to build a wall. He's going to make Mexico pay for it. We've all heard that over and over again. Well, what effect will that have on workers' compensation? Right now, undocumented workers in Illinois have the right to pursue workers' compensation benefits. That's the case in our state, as in most states. That likely won't change. So under prior administrations and under the current or upcoming administration, you will likely see no change in an injured worker's ability to recover workers' compensation benefits, even if they're here in an undocumented way. However, what we will likely see is that undocumented workers, even though they might be qualified to receive benefits under the current law, might be less inclined to file workers' compensation claims for fear of retaliation. A lot of people are fearful of how these types of employees will be treated under Trump. Will they be more inclined or less inclined to file for workers' compensation benefits under President Trump, under an administration that is less friendly to undocumented workers? And indeed, many of them might be, if you follow Trump's promises, might be sent back to Mexico, sent back to other countries. Will that result in a decrease in workers' compensation benefits? We think so, again, given that many of them may be fearful to file a claim. The next thing we want to cover in this topic is exclusive remedy. This is really not something that's been touched on by Trump so much, but there are many states that have slowly eroded the idea of exclusive remedy. Exclusive remedy basically means that if you injure yourself at work, the exclusive remedy for that, for the injured employee, is through the workers' compensation system. In Illinois, again, as in most states, the injured worker does not have the right to file a civil lawsuit against their employer in civil court with a jury. That is basically the grand bargain that's been etched out in most jurisdictions, meaning that the employee gives up the right to receive more lucrative benefits from their employer in a jury setting. In exchange, the employer does not have the right to assess fault for a workers' compensation claim to the employee. It's a no-fault system. That's the grand bargain. Will that change under Trump? Well, it's slowly changing in many parts of the country. Illinois hasn't really eroded it very much, but there is a trend nationally to claw back a little bit in terms of making workers' compensation the only avenue for an injured worker. Finally, we wanted to cover some changes here in our state. Obviously, we've got a governor that is a Republican in a very blue state. That has resulted in an impasse with regards to our budget. We're going on 2 years in Illinois without a budget, causing a lot of issues in our state. Governor Rauner has made workers' compensation reform central to his administration and central to coming up with a budget plan. As of today, he has said that he will not agree to a budget deal with the Democrats unless one of his core tenets has been followed, has been worked out. One of those 4 or 5 big issues is workers' compensation reform. So currently, as of the date of this taping, there are 13 bills that are pending with regards to workers' compensation reform. And again, Rauner has said that reforming the workers' compensation system is one of the things that will make a budget deal possible. Now, critics of workers' compensation reform, and by the way, we've had it in the last 15 years, we've had 2 separate pieces of legislation which have attempted to make our state's workers' compensation system more in line with others and more competitive. There are many critics of Illinois workers' compensation reform that will say, why do we even need reform? And there is some merit to that. As of the end of this past year, at the end of 2016, there has been the smallest number of filings, of new filings, at the Illinois workers' compensation system in history. Typically, we would see something like 70 or 80,000 filings a year, meaning 70 or 80,000 new employee injuries that are filed a year. This past year, 39,000. That's a pretty remarkable drop. So the good news for us, for you, for Illinois manufacturers, is that overall filings are down, dramatically down. So some of the reforms that have attempted to equalize the playing field have in fact worked. So a lot of critics say, well, why do we need reform? Filings are down. Well, you know, proponents of reform, Governor Rauner and his camp will tell you that reform is still needed. We still have a very expensive workers' compensation system. It's still very much skewed towards employees and not fair enough, and it's resulting in a lot of jobs being lost in our state because companies don't feel like Illinois is as competitive as some of our neighboring states, like Indiana, for example. So right now there are 13 bills pending. Among the provisions that are being suggested, among the big ones, are, for example, giving employers a credit for back injuries. That's a big one. So right now, if you injure your shoulder, let's say, or let me give you a different example. If you injure your foot and you file a claim, you're asking for benefits for your foot injury. If you received a prior award for a foot injury, let's say 2 years ago, and you received $10,000. Your employer has the right to take a credit for that $10,000 versus what you would recover in the new injury. That makes a lot of sense. You shouldn't be able to recover over and over again for an injury to the same body part. Each body part, once you get to 100% recovery, you shouldn't be able to recover. Well, that doesn't apply to back cases, which is the most frequently injured body part. The reforms that are currently in the Senate, one of them is to give credit for back injuries. That would be very helpful to employers. Another part of the legislation is to strengthen the fraud statute. This is something that would actually help employees because the language would strengthen the ability to go after employers for, in bad faith, putting up a roadblock to a workers' compensation claim. Another piece of the legislation is expanding the definition of a traveling employee. That is something that we're not in favor of. We think that the current law adequately deals with that definition. We think that this new legislation would actually make it easier to recover. A final provision that I'll talk about in terms of these changes is talking about quantitative versus qualitative risks. Not to bog you down too much, but this talks about what's a neutral risk versus a risk associated with employment. The language that's being discussed, I think, is a little confusing, but the idea that you should make the employee prove that their injury is in fact work-related is something that will assist manufacturers, assist employers, something we're in favor of. The one notable thing that's not being debated in this piece of legislation, or these 13 bills, is causation. That's the biggest thing that we want on our side, on the defense side. We want causation to be a more stringent requirement than it currently is. We want employees to have a greater burden in proving that work not only was a factor in causing their injury, but more than just, a factor. It should be a significant factor. You shouldn't be able to recover for an injury that work had a small percentage to do with. That's not addressed. It's something that we on our defense side and behalf of all the manufacturers and employers that we represent, that we want. So time is short. I gave you a quick overview. That is how we see workers' compensation changing in the Trump era, both nationally and locally. Stay tuned. And of course, my information is in front of you. I know the IMA is always available for questions. I am as well. And of course, let's work together to make workers' compensation great again. Thank you.